Before we return to that conversation, though, as promised, we're going to talk now about SEND, special educational needs and disability in schools. And the reason that we're talking about it is because a group of organisations, and these are really wide-ranging and quite prestigious, these organisations. So you've got the Association for Educational Psychology, the British Psychological Society's Division of Educational and Child Psychology, National Association of Principal Educational Psychologists, and many, many more of that ilk. They have composed this open letter to the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, asking her to rethink SEND provision in schools. And that was delivered to the Department for Education on Tuesday and has already got quite a lot of attention within Parliament. And joining us to discuss this is Dr. Joanna Stanbridge, who's Acting Principal Educational Psychologist and Research Tutor at the Institute for Education. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Can I ask you, first of all, to tell me a few things about what led you to writing and delivering this letter?
Yeah, thank you for having me and thank you for asking that. So as educational psychologists, we have this kind of unique insight into the SEND system because we live it every day. You know, we see the brokenness of it every day with the children and families that we work with the school staff and with the local authority professionals. So we've been seeing these increasing difficulties, and we've been saying we need to do something about this, and everyone be sort of saying, oh, we need to start a revolution, we need to make a change. And we got to the point where we said, actually, we really need to make this happen ourselves. And I think it's because we do have this particular perspective because we work across all levels of the system. So as I say, we're working with individual families, individual children, their families. We're working with the school staff who are working incredibly hard to support them, teaching assistants, teachers, Senkos, head teachers. But we're also working within local authorities where we're seeing local authority staff just not able to meet the needs, in a timely way of the children that they're working with. And what's clear to us, what this perspective made clear to us, is that if you really want to understand why we're in the crisis we're in, if you want to understand why we have a 91% increase in education healthcare plans since 2015, why we have over 250% increase in appeals to the tribunal since 2015, why we have over 20% of children unable to attend school at the moment, persistently absent, most likely often due to emotionally based school non-attendance, why we have so many more requests for special school and alternative provisions. If you want to understand that, you can't look at the SEND system in isolation and try and fix the SEND system. You've got to stand back and you've got to look at the positioning of the SEND system within the wider education system. And when you do that, what you can see is that there are a whole series of inconsistent legislative frameworks and different pressures which are conflicting, which are combining to make it really, really, really difficult for schools to provide the inclusive education that's needed for children who need something additional or different to attend school. So we came to writing this letter because it became absolutely imperative, and we're hearing more and more narratives that of SEND needs fixing, but it's not just a case that SEND needs fixing as an afterthought or a bolt-on. The way to go about addressing this crisis is to think about SEND as integrated, the needs of those children integrated into all education policy, and that's what we put in our letter.
I mean, you talk about these various structures and systems that are rubbing up against one another and creating barriers for children and their families as well, just making life unnecessarily difficult. Of course. Can you give us an example of the kinds of changes that you're calling for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I suppose if I sort of take you back to kind of one of the examples of something that's the upstream that's causing a difficulty. So it's about making these different frameworks across the whole education system work. So we know that in 2014, a series of curriculum reforms was introduced. We've got to assume that was a well-intentioned with the aim of improving standards. But that was done by increasing prescriptive and rigid curriculum, a series of curriculum, which made it very, very difficult for schools to provide flexibility. When you combine that with chronic underfunding and fewer staff, and then with the impact of fewer and fewer specialist staff available to schools, so mental health professionals, as you were just talking about, but also educational psychologists, what you have is a situation where schools can't easily provide inclusive education. So one of the things we'd be calling for is saying, making sure that whichever department is looking, or whatever part of the education system is looking at curriculum, making sure that they're thinking about the needs of those children who need something additional or different at the outset. Whoever's thinking about performativity measures for schools, for example, Ofsted, making sure that what they're saying is consistent with the curriculum, and then that's consistent with what we're asking schools to provide in terms of inclusive education. So certainly there needs to be much more funding, and that's something that was really clear in the debate that was held in Westminster this week. But also there are lots of things that could make a difference. So just a tangible example of that would be in secondary schools, it's allowing schools to offer alternative curricula like the ASDAN courses or the functional skills courses that they used to, that would provide children who are struggling with are likely to find it difficult to pass their GCSEs with some qualifications that they can use to go off and go on to college. So we know that at the moment only I think it's something like 45% of children are passing combined maths and English GCSE. When you look at children eligible for free school meals, that drops to about 27%. So we've got these huge numbers of children who are sitting in school, not accessing learning and not able to achieve the outcomes that they are, that are preset for them at the end of the key stage. So things like being flexible with the curriculum, being flexible with school performativity measures, but also everyday things like giving schools the space to provide interventions for literacy, normalising the use of assistive technology. There would be little things that would make a really big difference on the ground.
It's so interesting that you're saying this, because in our last hour we were talking about education because it's back to school time, and the theme, if there was one, was that we should be giving teachers more autonomy and trusting them as the experts to know the pupils and to know what they need. But as you say, it has become more and more prescriptive over recent years. What's the response been like so far?
The response has been really phenomenal, actually. I've been really taken aback by it. So it's been shared. It's been shared a huge amount, and I'm told it's been shared consistently with lots of MPs. And then we were delighted to see that in the debate led by Richard Bergen this week in the Westminster, he actually used parts of our letter in his brilliant speech. So he was talking not only about kind of these inconsistent frameworks that we're talking about and the impact of those, but also about needing to end this culture of blame, different parts of the system trying to blame each other. Because actually, when you step back and you look at the system, you can see that each part of it is working under their own pressures and frameworks, and that those things are often not consistent with each other. So we know that parents can have sometimes in rhetoric borne the brunt of that, the rhetoric around pushy parents, when actually we've got parents who are just trying their absolute best to make sure their children can access education within a system that at the moment was not designed with their children in mind. We have schools blamed for not being inclusive enough, but they're under huge pressure. They have to teach, and they are under the curriculum that they're given, but they also have to be working towards the school's performativity measures. And they're really high stakes competition between schools at the moment, because that's part of the culture that has been kind of growing over the last 30 or so years. We get local authorities staff blamed for not providing the statutory services needed in a timely way, and that's absolutely right. That we heard again in the debate that is nationally a huge problem, but local authorities have been cut by 21% in terms of their funding since 2012, and there are workforce crises there, and the most pernicious rhetoric of all really is that you hear sometimes that children are being blamed for not being engaged enough when they're in their own education, when in fact, as we've seen for lots and lots of children, the education that they are provided with, and this is not the fault of teachers have to teach what they're asked to teach, and they're this isn't about pitting parts of the system against each other. It's precisely the opposite. But children are being blamed for not being engaged enough. So what we said, and what Richard Bergen reflected in his speech, is we need to have an end to this culture of blame, and actually we need to work together and have a unified, collaborative response which says we need a system which works better for all children and young people, including those who need something additional or different to access education. Great reception.
That was my favourite part of the letter. I don't know if it's appropriate to say favourite, but the way that you painted the picture of all of these different groups of people who are really struggling, being encouraged to point the finger at each other when in fact they have a common enemy, and that is the system itself, which, you know, is a metaphor really for society more generally. Thank you so much, Dr. Joanna Stanbridge, Acting Principal Educational Psychologist and Research Tutor at the Institute for Education. It's a really good open letter. I will post the link to it on my social media. I am no longer on Twitter because it's a hellhole of fascism, but you can find me on Threads and Instagram, and I will post the link so you can read that letter onto my socials later on today. But for now, we are talking about reality TV. If you